The Road to War. Written and narrated by John Miro. Get more at servingworlds.com. "28. Bowen frowned. "Switch them off? What's that mean?" The young doctor, Kincaid, stared at the wall. "We got orders to terminate the project, and she tried to do it by killing our subjects." Willard and Bowen stared hard at Mantell. She was more comprised now, and smiled primly back. "Of course I did. What does terminate mean to you?" "Terminate the program, not the subjects." The short, pudgy guy stepped forward, wringing his hands. "We have a duty of care." Mantell shook her head. "The Alliance granted wartime exception for prisoner experimentation from duty of care." "You mean Reacher experimentation, don't you?" Bowen's eyes burned at Mantell. Dr. Scott Kincaid suddenly leapt to his feet, body trembling fiercely. He sucked in a deep breath and froze in place, eyes wide. Bowen jumped right up beside him. "Ha! They mixed some righteous stims in that spray skin, huh?" He thumped Scott once on the back. "Breathe, kid." The doctor did breathe and was off to the races again. "Karina coded their implants to turn off all autonomic functions in our subjects. We restarted them and deleted their overrides." Mantell clapped slowly. "Congratulations. Now no one can shut her down." Scott, Tubby, and the redhead all started shouting. "Hold it!" Willard shouted over them. The scientists held it. Willard reached in through his open spacesuit visor and scratched at his neck, sorting the facts out of the exchange. "How many overrides are we talking about?" 14, Mantell supplied. 9 in cryo, 4 sleeping next door. "And Jenna," Scott said, his words racing. "We put them in comas. Machines could keep them alive until we could disable the overrides." "After Janine woke up," Tubby swallowed hard. "We're keeping the rest under until we can make sure they won't try to kill us too," Mantell finished in a bored voice. "First sensible thing they've said all." The door boomed behind Willard and he spun. There was a helmet-sized dent right in the center of it. Another thundering blow landed and the window in the middle shattered. Willard looked around. Mantell fled deeper into the pod's ground floor. Tubby and Red disappeared down the upstairs hall screaming. Scott jumped up a stair but looked at him and Bowen and stood his ground. Willard nodded at him. "Brave kid." "What's she hitting the door with, kid?" Bowen yelled over his shoulder. Before Scott could answer, 2 ice-blue, writhing tentacles, each the size of Willard's wrist, slithered in through the shattered window. They flattened, pressing on the inside of the door. The door groaned and crumpled outwards. The tentacles thrashed blindly until they found spots where the door lifted away from the frame. The tentacles slithered back through those holes and tore it free of its hinges. The door crashed to the deck with a multi-part boom, and a shadow slid into the doorway. "I dulled up my olfactories, Karina," called a shrill voice. "You smell twice as bad now, you bitch." Willard froze when Janine walked through the door. She was naked. Blood dripped across her chest. Silver discs glowing blue in the center were implanted all over her body. Sores and weeping, inflamed skin surrounded each disc. None of that kept Willard from sighting his weapon on the center of her blood-soaked chest. He opened his mouth to bark an order, but what finally vapor-locked his brain and bolted his feet to the ground were the blue tentacles weaving over her shoulder. "Janine!" The kid in the glasses was talking. Willard shook off his shock and darted his eyes from the target to Scott Kincaid. He was coming down the stairs, hands empty held in front of him. "Janine, we didn't know. I'm sorry." Janine ignored the 2 armed Marines set up in prime firing position and took 2 powerful steps forward, and then it was her turn to freeze. "You didn't know about this?" She held her wrists up and out in the classic arrest me officer pose. 2 delicate strands of blue curled into the air, out of discs on her wrist. Bowen gasped. "What did they shut it, Bone?" Willard hissed. The strands disappeared back into her wrists. They were implants, Willard realized with a wave of nausea. All those little discs cut into her body were implants. He was a pilot, and his implants were specialized for flying. Bowen was a soldier, and his implants enhanced his ability to walk, plan, and fight in a mech. Janine's had an all-new specialty. She could wield crysteel. "Oh, lady," Bowen moaned, and Willard could hear the pity thick in his voice. "Did they pour a jug of this stuff right in you?" Her eyes turned to Bowen's, and they turned ugly. The sharp-tipped tentacles behind her head reared back. "Yes," Scott said, drawing her eyes back. "Yes, we all knew about the implants. And we knew about the risks too, Janine." Scott Kincaid had probably just saved Bowen's life, Willard thought. "And I'm sorry," Scott went on. "I'm sorry, Janine, but I swear none of us knew about Project Override. Please don't hurt anyone else because of her," Janine shrieked. She sniffed deeply and looked down the hall where Dr. Mentel had just disappeared. She looked right through Willard as if he didn't exist. "Scott's right, it wasn't us." Janine and Willard both looked up. Tubby and Red were back at the top of the stairs, both as white as ghosts, but they were there. "As soon as he found out Karina was pursuing Override, he told us," Tubby said. "We locked her out of the system. We made her stop." Red's lips shook so bad she could hardly speak. "Did you kill Stewart and Rick?" "They helped her," Janine snarled. "Ricky and Stewie helped her." She giggled then, high-pitched and hard. The tentacles above her head trembled right along with her hyena sounds. "I could feel them in there, in my sandbox with Karina, doing those things." Red started crying. "We never helped," Tubby said again, and shook his head, like maybe if he shook hard enough, this would all go away. "Never." Willard believed them. It looked like Janine did too. Her anger guttered out. The swirling crysteel lattices softened and thinned and disappeared behind her back. "You always got me extra juice," she said to Scott. "Watermelon flavor." Janine sagged against the wall, staring up at Tubby and Red. "You guys? You're okay." She shrugged her festering shoulders. "You can go." Janine noticed Willard again. She weighed him with her eyes. "You guys got sand in your boots, LT?" "Reach first," Willard replied automatically. "And always," both Bowen and Janine replied together. Janine looked his way. "Not going the way we thought." She looked down at her naked body and let out a half-laugh, half-snort. "I died to save Reach, and I let him bring me back to save her again." She lifted her hand, waved it at Bowen, then Willard. "You can go too." "But Mental, stay." The blue glowing center of every disc on Janine's body winked out at once, and she dropped to the floor like a wet rag. "Janine!" Scott pushed past Willard, skidding to his knees and pressing fingers to her throat. Tubby and Red dashed down the stairs to help. "Daniel, Judith!" Everyone froze at the sound of Dr. Mentel's call. "I want her comatose as fast as you can get her there." Mentel had a glowing screen in her hand. When the room froze and stared at her, she threw the tablet at the gawkers. "Need I remind you she's trying to kill us? Sedate her now." Tubby sank hard to his knees and retrieved the tablet. His lips moved as he read the screen. "You tried again." Red leaned over Tubby's shoulder. "You disabled her implant." She read further. "You shut down her breathing." Red's eyes widened. "Karina, she wasn't a threat to anyone." "You heard her just now. She still wanted me dead." Mentel stared, disbelieving at her teammates. "Listen to me. She's altered her base code since the last rounds of tests. All I could do is force reboot her interface." She made fists out of her hands and shook them. "Move! She'll only be out for seconds." No one moved. "Fine," she growled and reached for Willard's rifle. With a snarl, he twisted the gun out of her reach and raised the back of his hand to strike her. Janine jerked back awake with a shrill scream. Tentacles shot out of her back and propelled her to her feet. More tentacles reached out, stabbing wildly. Willard gasped as his thigh went numb. He looked down in time to see the semi-solid crysteel spike emerging from his pant leg before it whipped, sending him flying. Bowen let loose on full auto. Willard slammed into Tubby and Red. Behind him, Janine shrieked again. The world went sideways. Willard landed on the stairs. Suns exploded behind his eyelids. Bowen screamed and fired another burst. Willard staggered to his hands and knees, wincing to bring the world into focus. He could make out Janine's shadow in the doorway. She had too many arms, like some death goddess he had read about once. Then she was gone. He heard coughing, moaning, and Mantell was leaning over him, reaching for the gun again. He jabbed her in the side. She hit the ground wheezing. He'd landed the punch just right, sending a spasm into her diaphragm. "Can't breathe? Good," he rasped, climbing unsteadily to his feet. "Too bad it's only temporary." He pushed the side of her head and she fell away, panicked eyes whipping from side to side, mouth sucking for air. "Bowen," he called. Bowen wasn't at the foot of the stairs anymore. Bowen scanned again, a second look showing red on the floor, crying on Tubby's shoulder. He was calling her Judy and moaning. Tubby had a bloody mouth and a laceration on his cheek, probably from colliding with the butt of Willard's gun as he flew through the air by them, but otherwise he looked okay. He stepped over Mantell, still blessedly silent but also unhurt, to raise his weapon and jog to the door. Steaming holes in the pod. Some blood on the doorframe and on the deck plating outside, but no Janine. "Bowen," he called again. Still no answer, but this time Willard caught a glimpse of him, crumpled on the floor a ways down the downstairs hallway. Or most of him was. Some of him was gone, and what was left was bleeding out onto the floor. You have been listening to Reach, The Road to War. Written and narrated by John Miro. Music, All This by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Hear more of the story at servingworlds.com. Thank you for listening.